What is up, fam? Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Wednesday, so you know Wednesday is family day. Got my little brother Rohan Chakravarti on the show with me today. Bro, you like a full week into summer vacation now, man. How's it feeling? What's the routine like? What's been going on for you, brother?
So you already know that we start in the mornings at like 10, 11 a.m. at the minimum. Nah, I mean it's been good. It's been good. First couple of weeks were busy. We went I had a little trip down south. We went to like Pismo in that area, and then I flew out to Wisconsin last week, and then now we're chilling. Back to streaming, back to the Wednesdays with Sunil, which are
I
the
love
dope
it.
times of the week.
I love it. I love it. Man, do you have like activities planned, or are you just kind of like chilling before off to college and you know it's going to be, wild with school and, maintaining your streaming schedule and writing and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean there is a good amount of plans, especially in July prior to training camp. I'm going to Europe, so
Wow.
imagine me streaming over there at like 4 a.m. and then coming here at the right time. But no, I mean there are a couple of things like that planned, but it's just like kind of the fun stuff before we get over there. Nothing too serious.
I love it, bro. Enjoy it, man. Like the
Yeah.
summer before college, you got to just enjoy it because after that, it's all buckle down and, work hard. Raphael, 5629ers. What's up, Sunil, Rohan, and everybody or everyone? Thanks so much for joining in, Raphael, man. You definitely one of my faves. So, Rohan, obviously, dead time for the 49ers right now. Not much going on until training camp. However, I still think there's a lot to point out as far as things that have kind of revealed themselves over this offseason and just being able to process everything now that we've kind of stabilized and know at least who the potential talent is. So I wanted to talk to you about this because this is something that's really kind of shown itself to me over the last few seasons. It seems like the 49ers have gotten to a point, especially this front office, where they're tending to draft and build a roster out, not necessarily just for the present year, but they're kind of drafting players a year too early versus a year too late and then redshirting them. And we saw it last season, most notably with a guy like Aaron Banks, a guy like Trey Lance, Talanoa Hufanga. I think even a guy like Elijah Mitchell probably would have been in that situation. But, Aaron Laken Tomlinson leaves, you put in Aaron Banks. Jimmy G eventually, hopefully, will leave. You put in Trey Lance, right? Jaquaski Tart leaves. You put in Talanoa Hufanga, and you're kind of seeing it again with how they drafted this year, right? Most likely, Emmanuel Mosley is going to leave in free agency. You've already kind of situated that by bringing in a guy like Samuel Womack, a guy like Terry Castro Fields, and a guy a guy like Mike McGlinchey might leave in free agency. You re-up with a guy like Spencer Burford. And what I mean by like this new team building strategy, and I named the stream, the secret sauce, it seems like they're putting themselves in situations where they don't have to be desperate anymore.
Mm-hmm.
In a few ways, the rookies that they draft are not necessarily guys that need to perform immediately. They could redshirt, come in spot duty, but really, develop to where the pressure is on as a starter. And two, when it comes to contract negotiations, they don't have to be desperate as far as keeping guys in because they've already developed the next wave of players. And even a guy like Drake, who was drafted in, with the second round pick, I don't expect him to get that much playing time this year. He really needs to, develop some more. And it's a blessing, I guess, to come into a situation where you're on a good team with good coaching, but there's no pressure for you to really go out there and perform because you have that year to develop. What do you think? I mean, one, do you agree with me in assessing what the strategy is? And if you do, where do you think this came from? Like, why all of a sudden do this, which wasn't necessarily the case earlier on when they were drafting?
I'll say yes and no, and I'll agree. I mean, you're asking the question essentially, what's changed in the philosophy, right? And there's a distinct answer in my opinion. 2017, 2018, 2019, and then even you can include 2020, although it was really those first 3 years. the 49ers were not a good roster. Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch came in and inherited a bottom of the line roster. That's why the 49ers drafted third overall in the first year, in the first draft of the Lynch Shanahan regime. And so when you look in the first couple of years, right, you're not necessarily looking for like redshirting players. You're looking for players that can compete and start the turnaround of your franchise. Unfortunately, it didn't necessarily work out to their expectation in that first draft when they drafted Solomon Thomas third overall. And, I think that was also, I forget who, Reuben Foster. Reuben Foster was
Yeah.
the other first round pick. Both of them didn't pan out, but you also get franchise cornerstones like a Kittle and a Fred Warner, right? And all these different pieces in these draft classes as well. So my point is, in the early years, you're trying to start the turnaround for your team. Whereas in the past couple of seasons, especially the last two, that team's franchise cornerstones are already in place. The infrastructure for your roster is in place. And you don't necessarily have the high draft pick where you can go ahead and say, this one guy is going to change my franchise just like that, right? Apart from Trey Lance, of course, because the 49ers like traded 3 first-round picks to get Trey Lance. But for the most part, right, you had Nick Bosa, you had Debo Samuel, you had Brandon Ayuk, who you drafted in 2020. And then you had a number of players on defense as well, like an Arik Armstead and a DeForest Buckner before he was traded, and a Jimmy Ward, right? All these cornerstones that you develop around. And instead of trying to get players to immediately impact your team to try and get yourself out of a position like you were in 2017. Instead, you're looking, how do I ascend my championship window? And how do I not only get there immediately, but how do I sustain that championship window? Because a lot of teams fall off after that one ring. And then that's where coaches and front offices tend to lose their jobs because they can't replicate the success that they first had. Just look at the 49ers' last head coach, Jim Harbaugh, right? He went to a Super Bowl back in 2012 when he faced off against the Baltimore Ravens. 2 years later, he goes 8-8 2014, and he's out. While many 49er fans, myself included, disagreed with the situation and why and that Harbaugh shouldn't have been fired, the NFL is a league based on success, right? You need to have success, and that's why I think the philosophy has changed. It's just because of the direction of the team. I don't think that, honestly, I don't think that it's as like I don't think that it's a philosophy that is only used by the 49ers. I think many teams use this as to try and get their team better. It's just other teams have more significant holes that they try and tend to attend to really early, right? Before this year, could we really say the 49ers didn't draft need over BPA in the first couple of rounds? No. In 2020, they took Kinlaw, right? And they took Ayuk because they needed a wide receiver too after the departure of Emmanuel Sanders. Kinlaw was obviously to replace DeForest Buckner. And then in 2021, their biggest need they felt was quarterback because Jimmy Garoppolo just wasn't cutting it, not only because of his play, but because of the injury history. Hence why they moved 3 first-round picks to get him. That was a need-based pick as well. And then obviously in the years past, it was Mike McGlinchey over one of the safeties like Derwin James in his draft class, who was a better player at the time. In 2017, it was Solomon Thomas, of course, a need-based pick to try and solidify the defensive line, which was their main philosophy. So really, this was the first year where they didn't necessarily go need-based picks. And that's where you get to this team strategy, right? When you're not going need-based picks, you might not get players that are immediately impacting your roster, but instead you're getting players that you know can make an impact at some point, be it now or in the future, based on potential and based on what they've already shown, like a Drake Jackson. So really, short and simple, I think it's just because the direction of the roster has changed from a team trying to get out from under the rubble to a team trying to maintain its status currently.
I think you make a good point. Steve O Supremo, thank you for joining in, my man. I think part of it is NFL bodies versus 20-year-olds who are in class half the time. That could be true as well. And I think, both of you guys are right. I agree. I mean, I think that definitely this is a abundance of riches issue. I do think that, though, it is something that where you say you think a lot of teams do this type of strategy, I don't know if I necessarily agree so much. I was really thinking about teams as far as who is drafting guys in their first, second, third rounds and then just redshirting them, like not even giving them a chance to play and things of that. And I really couldn't find too many examples, honestly, Rohan, of teams that are consistently doing it this way, where they're drafting a position that they know they're going to maybe lose a guy the next year. And then that's when the person jumps in and actually gets some time. There's not too many first-year quarterbacks that don't play right away, or that were drafted in the first round drafted quarterbacks that don't play right away. There's not too many second-round drafted offensive linemen that don't play right away. And we just saw that happen, with the 49ers in this last year's draft. I do think a part of it obviously is that the fact that they've, built up a roster through drafting and free agency where they have so much depth at a lot of pieces, where they're not necessarily needing these guys to be impactful players right away. But I also think that's part of the secret sauce that I'm talking about as far as the foresight and how they're developing this roster. I think a lot of people look at, the offseason and how this team is built, and they're thinking like, yo, you never really brought in a big name. You never really went for it. Like, that was a lot of what the narrative for some of the detractors of what this team has done as far as team building when they're, adjacent to like the Rams or, to Tampa Bay. But I look at it and I'm like, man, this is really a way to develop a dynasty where you never have to be desperate in the draft to necessarily hit. Like, you just have to have confidence in your coaching staff, have confidence in your scouting staff, have confidence in the culture that you've created. And then these rookies are coming in, really giving every opportunity to be successful. And it's a way to manage the cap as well, because you always have a rookie option or a rookie contract option, so you don't have to necessarily overpay in free agency. So that's where I think it all kind of goes hand in hand as far as, it is something that we're seeing the second part of it. But I do think that maybe a lot of this was planned from the beginning, and this is just part of the process. What do you say about something like that?
I see your point, and I misspoke a little bit. What I meant was I didn't necessarily mean that. I think the 49ers are unique in this way, but what I meant was there are other test cases of obviously redshirts. The famous ones are guys like Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, but it's not only at one position, right? You're right. The 49ers consistently do this. And to me, the reason that I think that this is implemented with the 49ers as opposed to other franchises, especially rebuilding franchises, is because of competition, right? When you draft a player high and early, especially as a guy or as a head coach or a GM coming in early, it is not a good sign if you draft a first round pick with a 5th overall or 3rd overall pick and you're a rebuilding franchise and that player doesn't play in his first year, right? I don't think it's that bad for a player, especially a quarterback, to sit early, right? I think we've seen that a lot. Not many quarterbacks start week one. I think that unless they're essentially handed the job, I don't think that happened, right? Like you saw Justin Fields sit to Andy Dalton, a replacement level quarterback. I mean, we obviously saw Trey Lance sit to Jimmy Garoppolo. We saw Davis Mills sit. Even like one of the best quarterbacks in his rookie year in recent history, in Justin Herbert, we saw him sit to Tyrod Taylor early, right? So, but you're right, and the point is the 49ers don't necessarily let them. It's not that they don't let them play. It's just that they don't play because of competition. And I think other teams can't necessarily enable competition as much because it doesn't show it doesn't show the clear direction the franchise wants to take. Why are you drafting these players and not playing them when the whole point is to get these players better? Whereas for the 49ers, I think the front office has already established itself to ownership, hence how they got a 6-year extension for both Shanahan and Lynch, to the point where they're okay doing this because the whole point for them, the only directive is winning. It's not only the major directive in the short term is winning, while also expanding their franchise and trying to get better as the years go on. So to me, I can definitely see your point. I definitely understand what you mean. It's just I think that the reason is because of how different teams treat their rosters, right? And then and then one other thing that I want to bring up, 49ers, they're a high paying roster team, but teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, teams like the what do you call it, Los Angeles Rams, had outstanding contracts. I think even more outstanding. Obviously, the Chiefs are paying Mahomes. They find ways to pay different players, right? They just signed Joe Tooney 2 years ago, despite having one of the highest payrolls as possible. And that forces them to go ahead and draft rookies based on need, but also just not, even if it's not on need, to insert them immediately because they have those significant holes on their roster. Same with the Rams, right? Last year, they drafted a cornerback in the 7th round. I think his name was Robert Rochelle, and he was it was Rochelle or Dion, but they were immediately inserted in the starting lineup right? And they immediately played a ton of time alongside Ramsey and Darius Williams because they had that hole after losing Troy Hill to the Cincinnati Bengals. So to me, it's both a reflection of the 49ers doing a good thing roster wise, where they have players in place where they don't necessarily need to force players to start before they're ready, and also a part of the 49ers being at a place where they can instill competition rather than having rookies start just because they got drafted early.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with you. And Tom Bragg says Trey Sermon and Aaron Banks are in much better shape this year. We should get much better play out of both of them this season. And Tom, I completely agree with you. Thanks for joining in. I mean, the second year class, like, there's no second year of the year. Like, it's rookie and then just you're in with everybody else. But I mean, you think about all of the second year players that are going to be playing pivotal roles. You have obviously at the helm, Trey Lance, Elijah Mitchell, Trey Sermon, Aaron Banks, Talanoa Hufanga, right? And then, I think there's a few more that I'm missing as well that are gonna be like intricate players. Maybe a guy like Ambry Thomas. So that's about 5 or 6 players, Rohan, that are gonna be playing some significant roles that really need to, really need to play. And for some reason, and I agree with it, I'm not really too worried. Like because, like I said, they weren't forced to be out there. They got some experience playing in spot duty here and there. But we just have so much confidence in this coaching staff and their ability to develop talent that we feel like a year of kind of redshirting are going to make them bona fide productive starters right from the jump. And I don't know. I know that it's kind of like step by step, and obviously what they've done in the past is giving them the opportunity to do this. But I also think the fact that they're taking this route is an active decision, because they could still reach. They could have reached for a center this year, right? They could have reached for a higher, level offensive lineman. They could have reached for a lot of things, but instead they're like, let's play the board. We know what we have on this roster. Let's not necessarily draft for this year. Let's draft for next year and the years to come. And I don't know if I believe that there's other teams that are looking at it from that type of strategy, even if they still have like the level of talent that the 49ers have. And I just think I'm very happy that this is what our regime is doing, because I just think that this is not only going to be a good team right now, but this is going to be a good team in the future. And, you brought up a good point as far as, okay, well, what happens 3 years from now when you have to give Trey Lance big money? Obviously, if he's going on the trajectory that we believe he's going to be. I still think this type of philosophy still plays a role, because you're constantly looking at, hey, we might lose this guy because we can't pay him, but we already have his replacement in a year or two early to develop him, so that we're not really missing a beat. And I just think that that's just a great mentality to have, which I think is pretty unique, to be honest, Rohan. I can't think of a team that does this so regularly.
Yeah, and I mean, it is a good thing, right? Like, a lot of people like to harp on it because obviously you want top rookies to play. But the point of the matter is the 49ers have found a way to develop their own players. Like they develop their players. It seems like the players have improved. You hear everything about Trey Lance. It seems like he's definitely improved and he's back to healthy. And I think I was one of the people that thought that Trey Lance should sit his rookie year. Behind Jimmy Garoppolo for a number of factors, including based on words from his own camp and his own people, right? So like I was one of those people, and I think that I'm not, as long as the strategy works, you can't really blame them, right? And so far there hasn't been anything to show that the strategy hasn't worked, right? You reached an NFC championship game, and now you have a quarterback that has ultimately developed a ton since he showed up last year at camp. So to me, I like the strategy, and I think that it is a good implementable strategy, right? And it's not like over the past 2 years, players that I felt were involved in the strategy. Elijah Mitchell, I thought, was a Raheem Mostert replacement, and he essentially served as that last year, right? When Mostert went down, who replaced him? It was Elijah Mitchell, who thrived in that role. You have Aaron Banks, who was a Tomlinson replacement. And while we don't necessarily think, like, I think the one thing the 49ers might do differently is that they do plan a year ahead, right? Which is your exact point. Whereas other teams understand what these issues are and either draft a player a year ahead and play them at a different position before moving them back to their original position, like the Pittsburgh Steelers did with Kendrick Green and offensive linemen like that this past year, and Kevin Dotson. But they could also just wait till the guy leaves, make sure he leaves because free agency happens before the draft, so you have full certainty that he's gone, and then draft a player, which is the more ideal route for certain teams.
Got you. Steve O Supremo has a great question. Being Kyle asked Gore his thoughts on Lance before the draft. What role will Gore have in the front office? What do you think, Rohan?
I think like he'll start it at first as a scout, right? I think the value that he has with running backs, I think he immediately starts something like a running back scout, trying to get some good running backs, and it seems like he's got a good eye for talent, right? He's made for the front office, and I mean, if that's meant to be, then whatever role, I don't know what the title will be, to be honest, like special advisor, unless you legitimately want to call him a running back scout. But I think he'll help with scouting, especially at the running back position. He might even serve as an ulterior coach, helping guys like Anthony Lynn and Bobby Turner with the running back room.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought about it as much as him being an actual like role, a specific role in every single day with the 49ers. But I definitely can see him be a big mentor to the guys, kind of like what Steve Young is doing. So at the minimum, you're going to be able to see him do something like that. But if Shanahan really appreciates his advice and really thinks that he has, a good eye for talent, absolutely. I mean, if that's a route that Gore wants to take as far as get into coaching, what better staff than Kyle Shanahan's staff that, within 2 or 3 years, you seem like if you're developed there, you're going to be able to, be in position to get, some head coaching jobs very, very soon. So that would be amazing. I mean, obviously Frank Gore is a very fan favorite for all of the faithful. So for him to be able to get an opportunity like that, just puts another feather in the cap for Kyle Shanahan and Shannon stands like me. So let's keep going on the roster building. So I've been doing like a little bit of a series on all of my shows, Rohan, as far as like kind of figuring out who may make the 53-man roster based off of the positions that were selected last season, as far as the roster spots divvied up for each position group. Clearly, last year, the most roster spots were divvied up for the defensive line. Clearly, that boded well because, they were able to keep a lot of fresh legs there. And I think it probably is going to be similar where the defensive line does have a bulk of the players. However, they did select 11 last season. My question to you is, when you break down the cornerback room, last year they gave 6 spots to the cornerback room. Well, this year, if they do the same thing, we're talking about 2 or 3 players that could be, really productive players, not make the roster because of the logjam there at cornerback, including a guy like Diamador Lenore, who was just drafted last season. Running back room as well. If you're just picking 5 there, with Juszczyk for sure being one, now you're looking at Jeff Wilson Jr., Jordan Mason, Hasty, like guys that could make the roster and maybe get picked up by other teams if you don't put them on your 53-man roster. So I'm sure you've gone through this, mentally with you, you're always thinking about who's going to make the team. Do you see the need for the 49ers to still carry 11 defensive linemen, or should they put some serious thought into adding some players to other position groups? And just cornerback, running back were just the 2 that came to my mind. If you think there's another group, please feel free to mention it. But what do you think about all of that?
Now it is definitely complicated because you're not even just talking about 11. Like when you say carrying 11 on the 53-man roster, that doesn't mean 11 people are necessarily going to be active, right? 11 players might mean a couple go on injury reserve, so you waive a guy and then you bring him back immediately, like the 49ers have done with Dante Johnson maybe 50 million times. It's like a process like that, right? off the top of my head, I already know Kalia Davis likely will be placed on some sort of list, be it short-term IR to begin the season or physically unable to play. At least that's what my assumption is for the 49ers to carry another body and stay fresh. So that's an extra body that you're carrying on the 53-man roster that won't be a part of the 53-man roster at the very beginning. And so for that reason, the 49ers, remember last year, they did the exact same thing with D Ford. They carried him on the roster, immediately placed him on IR. So while it was 11, it essentially was 10. And I think the 49ers might carry 10 this year just because there's so much more depth at other positions, whereas that necessarily wasn't the case this year, where they might need to protect other players, right? And when you go through the roster, right, you have Ark Armstead, Nick Bosa. I'm going to count Ebukam because despite his cap hit, I still believe the 49ers have budgeted for a factor that for the way that Ebukam is going to be a part of this roster. So that's where I'm going to count Ebukam. That's 3. You count Charles Omenihu, Jordan Willis. That's 5. Kalia Davis, like I said, Javon Kinlaw. I assume Hassan Ridgeway, given that the 49ers lose $1 million if they cut him. That's 8 right there. Kimoko Toure, and then my 10th is Drake Jackson. So I think that it is going to be 10 players, and I think the balance works out well, right? Because at the defensive tackle position, you're considering Ridgeway, you're considering Kinlaw, and I actually expect Armstead will be there because he moved to the interior last year, and I actually expect Omenihu to be there as a pass rusher, and hopefully one of the other guys, be it Kevin Atkins, who's an undrafted rookie, or be it Maurice Hurst or Kevin Givens. Hopefully one of those 3 ends up on the practice squad where you get an extra guy should there be injury. So I'm thinking there's going to be 10 just because of the depth of the other positions. And I know
where do you think that extra roster spot goes? What position group?
Ooh, that'll be hard. So, I mean, I know you brought up cornerback and running back, right? I think those 2 remain the same. I think running back, I don't think that we exceed 5, including Juszczyk. I think it's 4 running backs, and I think it's Juszczyk. And the reason is, while we love running backs and while we run through them a lot, the 49ers have made sure that they've imposed some physicality with their running back group this year, right? You added Tyrion Davis-Price, a guy who's going to probably play around 225. You have Elijah Mitchell, who bulked up to 220 to be able to sustain more hits and not be as injury prone. You have a guy in Jeff Wilson or Jordan Mason. I think the battle is between them 2. And then you also have Trey Sermon, who's a lot more leaner, who's a lot more fit going into his year. So I think that you honestly will have 4. The battle is between Mason and Jeff Wilson Jr. And really, I think it's a tough decision because I think honestly both could be claimed if you waive one or the other. So me personally, I think at this point in their careers, and especially given the upside, I would go with Mason just because he fits the Anthony Lynn mold of the bigger running back, and he also is a more reliable pass catcher with volume. At least that's what it's being seen in training camp. So I think the running back room doesn't change, or the cornerback room doesn't change. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm gonna press you on the cornerback room, and we'll see how you do that. But first, we got our number 1 hype man, Spy Nick Danger. Go Niners, but not just go Niners. Go Sunil, not just go Sunil. Go Rohan, not just go Rohan. Hit the like button. That's how I imagine you saying it.
Yes, sir.
That's how I imagine you typing it, Spy Nick Danger. So I hope that's how the energy that you be typing it in, because that's how I hear it in my head. So let's talk about that cornerback room. So last year they carried 6. All right. So I personally think there's already 5 that are locks. And this is the assumption that Jason Verrett is healthy, because all signs have said that. So you got obviously Charvarius Ward, Emmanuel Mosley, Ambry Thomas, Jason Verrett, Samuel Womack. So that's 5 of the 6 already locks. Well, now we have Daquez Denard, Dante Johnson, Diamador Lenore, Tyreek Castro-Fields. Of those 4, that means only 1 of them are making the team.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds crazy, because that means you're giving up on at least one of the guys that you've drafted in the last 2 years. And then you got...
you're saying
because either Tyreek Castro-Fields or Diamador Lenore don't make it. Both of those guys are either a rookie or second year. Daquez Denard is the only specialized, slot nickel corner there. And Dante Johnson is like the utility man. Like, he could fit anywhere. It's like, I just don't understand how they could narrow that one position and get rid of like three of those four guys. It just doesn't make sense to me. So what gives you the confidence that they could do that?
I'll break it down a little bit. You talk about those four players, two young players and two veterans. Now, I could be corrected, and if someone wants to correct me, they can. I believe, though, that because the two veterans have accrued a certain amount of NFL service time, they don't go through the waiver process. And I'm talking about Denard and I'm talking about Dante Johnson. So the 49ers and one of those two players could come to an agreement, whereas they have to dump a player on IR. I already mentioned a guy like Kalia Davis. I do assume that even if Jason Verrett is at 80%, they're going to place him on IR to begin the season to have that extra body. So I do assume that despite Verrett being a part of that group, he probably goes on IR. And so you have one of those veterans that ends up being there. Now, between the battle between Castro Fields and Deommodore Lenoir, that's a tough one, right? It is a tough one because you're right. You do have five players there. And it could also be the other case. It could also be the 49ers cut Verrett knowing that, or cut Verrett in the case like that they want to upload someone else to IR and then bring him back because he's a veteran as well. Have some sort of agreement there. But to me, it is a battle between Lenoir and Castro Fields. I have less and less confidence in Lenoir at the moment just because Lenoir, right, he came in last year. He was expected to be the slot corner at some point, started on the outside, struggled, and then the 49ers didn't have confidence in him really. Darqueze Dennard was there just a week and a half before week 18, and he ended up getting 32% of the snaps while Lenoir was inactive the entire week. Fast forward to this offseason, and it's not Lenoir starting in the slot. It's Darqueze Dennard again starting in the slot, with Samuel Womack being that other guy. So if the 49ers have an utmost confidence in Darqueze Dennard, what you do is you cut him, and then you bring him back right after because he doesn't have to go through the waiver process. I don't know what happens to Deommodore Lenoir. I honestly don't even know if he gets claimed off waivers if the 49ers cut him, and that might make him a practice squad guy. Tariq Castro Fields the same, but I think that if you're basing it off those two, I personally prefer Castro Fields and then bring one of the other guys on as that potential slot corner. I think Dante Johnson will end up making the roster just because he's had that versatility. But then we get to that safety debate because Dante Johnson has been taking all of his reps at free safety this year, and that could bring a safety debate between the other guys because Tarvarius Moore does not have any dead money if he gets cut. That's an interesting debate. So really, there is a ton of these debates. I want to get your take, though. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit confused as far as what you were saying as far as cutting one of these vets like Verrett and then bringing them back. So tell me who your six would be as of now.
Okay, so like essentially what I mean, that was just a suggestion. I do think Verrett will make the initial 53. But
so let's just go through the six first, and then I'll try to play through what I don't understand about what you're saying. So what would be the six that you select?
So it'd be Ward, Mosley, Verrett, Samuel Womack, Ambry Thomas. Those are your five. And then I'm saying Castro Fields right now is your six. Although it can be a flip-flop between Castro Fields or Lenoir. One of those two.
Okay, so let's say you still want to get Dennard on the team. So you're saying you cut him, but he doesn't have to go through waivers. So you stash him on the practice squad?
So no, what happens is you cut Dennard. He's essentially a free agent at that point. You don't have to stash him on the practice squad. You cut Dennard. The 49ers did this with Dante Johnson. It's the same thing I'm essentially saying. You cut Dennard, you put Jason. The reason that you have to make Jason Verrett on the 53-man is because to place someone on IR, they have to be a part of your 53-man roster. So you put Jason Verrett on the 53-man, place him on IR, and then bring back Dante Johnson or Dennard as a part of the 53-man roster.
Got you. So they're just basically like clerically not on the team, but it's just a matter of like just dotting your I's.
It's essentially a formality, but
eventually they have to only carry six. So whenever Verrett comes back, that means somebody's off, right?
Correct. But that's where the value of the practice squad comes in. And I think that's where the 49ers realize that Dante Johnson, even if that move happens, they value him, which is why they gave him $712,000 guaranteed. Even if he ends up on the practice squad, he gets that guaranteed money. And so his contract situation doesn't necessarily get ruined if he ends up on the practice squad because he ended up making the money anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I just think that's a lot of like hopeful stuff because
I don't know, because I think like the reason that it sounds complicated as it is, but the
not necessarily
49ers are playing.
complicated, but what I mean by is you're hoping that a lot of these guys don't end up getting on a different roster, right?
Oh, I
That's
mean,
what
that's
you're kind
true.
of hoping.
It's not that I'm hoping, but it's just those are the people that you can carry right now. Like, can you tell me, like, for the cornerbacks, right? We're talking how this is one of the deepest rooms, and
Right.
if you have the value of placing two players maybe on the practice squad or one of those veterans on the practice squad, you essentially have 7 cornerbacks at your disposal. In a regular game, you're not going to use all 6 of those cornerbacks, so you don't need to elevate one. But what I'm saying is, like, there isn't a necessity at the moment for that 8th corner. So I think the risk is okay to take if you get one of those guys claimed, especially if it's a guy who you don't have much faith in, like a Diameter Lenore, which it doesn't seem like the 49ers have much faith in at the moment. Like, he's your 3rd guy on the depth chart at the cornerback position going into his 2nd year. I honestly think it's Womack and Denard at the top 2, and then it's him.
Yeah, so Tom Bragg thinks Johnson will be cut. Lenore and Castro Fields will be on the practice squad.
And that
I
also
just
brings up your point, right? How they could be claimed if they end up on the practice.
right. And it's just so weird to like draft players and they not make the roster. Usually that's not a good sign and that's not something that the 49ers usually do. However, it could be once again, they've just gotten so good at building a team that now some of their draft picks just can't make the team because there's so much depth there. So
Right. And I mean, like you said, it's a bad thing. I don't necessarily view it that much that way because you get to make the team, right? It like or it's not that you get to make the team. I mean, the 49ers have so much depth that these guys aren't making the team, and it's for a good reason. It's not because of them necessarily, but it's just because there's so many good players and you're trying to compete.
yeah, Todd Bragg brings up a good point, and this is kind of how I'm eyeing things. By the time the season starts, it would have been a whole year since Verrett tore his ACL, so he should be healed, ready to go by then. So there would be no need to put him on the IR. From what Shanahan said, in the limited time he's talked about Verrett, he's talking about him like he expects him there competing in training camp. And if that's the case, then if Verrett's healthy, Rohan, he might be CB1. You know what I mean? With how good he is. Now, clearly we haven't necessarily seen him play, more than that 2020 season fully healthy. But I mean, he's very dangerous if he is there healthy. And him and Charvarius Ward, to me, would be one of the best cornerback combos in the NFL if they're both healthy and, playing at their capabilities.
He could be. He could be. I'm just thinking the 49ers operate with a lot more caution just because of how how Verrett's injury history has been. So that's where my point comes up from. But Steve-O's right there. Yeah, 2 quarterbacks does free up a spot.
Do you think they only carry 2 quarterbacks?
I do. Yeah. I think it's only Sudfeld and I think it's only Lance. I think Purdy ends up on the practice squad just like Sudfeld was last year.
Okay, cool. Well, that kind of leads me to my next point because there is a lot of depth there, right? You talked about, we just talked about, cornerback room, but let's say like the running back room, you said it was between Jordan Mason and Jeff Wilson Jr. You talked about the defensive line with a guy like Samson Ebicom with a lot of other options there to play outside as well. I think even in the linebacker room, you have, some depth there in pieces. So like maybe a guy like Dre Greenlaw could be quote unquote expendable. So let's talk about what are some, and the 49ers do have a history of making some trades during training camp to pick up some late round picks. We saw it with Breida. We saw it with Jonas Griffin. Most recently, do you know what kind of players do you see here that could be potential trade departures or even guys that they cut just because they have somebody cheaper that they could put on the roster, so quote unquote cap casualties?
Yeah, I mean, just to state the obvious to begin, I think D Ford is the obvious potential cap casualty. And even though he's not necessarily a cap casualty because the 49ers lose money when they cut him. But yeah, exactly. D Ford for the easy win. I think that is like he's like the bona fide one. But when you talk about the rest of the defensive line, I don't know. I don't know if you'll agree with me. I think Kerry Hyder might be one of those guys. Hyder, though, does have a 750 million guarantee. One guy that when I was looking,
750,000. I'm
oh
assuming.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
750 million would be wild, bro. Like he's making more than Deshaun Watson. Like that'd be crazy.
But one guy that I'll mention on the defensive line that a lot of people, myself included, have high optimism for is Maurice Hurst. I actually liked the Maurice Hurst signing a lot when the 49ers signed him last year. He was injured, though, last year, and now the 49ers can save an entire million without losing any dead money if they cut Maurice Hurst. And I think that he could be a casualty this year, just given the amount of depth and given the savings that they could have, probably because they can place him on the practice squad for this year, let him get healthy if he ain't fully healthy yet, and then bring him elevate him should they need to.
Yeah, and I mean a guy like Kevin Givens is another name that
Exactly.
could possibly see himself on the outside looking in. Um, Tom Bragg says, "I really hope that we keep both Greenlaw, Al-Shaair long term. They are both too good to part with. Those two, along with Fred Warner, form the best linebacking group in the league." And I completely agree with you, Tom. They definitely would be. It's just the 49ers are just so good at developing these guys, late round
Yeah.
picks, undrafted free agents, that you kind of look for where can I get the most return on my
Exactly.
investment. So if you could get a Dre Greenlaw that you got in the 5th round and get like a 3rd or 4th round draft pick out of him, you're looking at it like, that's an upgrade. I mean, they try to do that with Aziz, right? Undrafted rookie, put a 2nd round tender on him. They ended up signing him. So it's just, for me, it is a business at the end of the day. Do you, Rohan, do you potentially see guys that might be traded? And I think the 3 that I'm really looking that I think some other teams might like want, especially if there's some injuries to those specific positions. A guy like Jeff Wilson Jr., a guy like Samson Ebicom, and Dre Greenlaw, like I just mentioned. Those 3 guys that I think other teams would value that the 49ers could get some assets out of and kind of help them make an easier decision as far as with an extra roster spot to put in somebody else into those roles. Can you see any of those guys actually being traded?
It's interesting. Jeff Wilson Jr. I don't think will fetch anything in a trade just because of the running back position that he plays, and also because he wasn't really that efficient last year. 3.7 yards per. He was really a third option last year of sorts based on the amount of volume that he got. And so to me, I can't really see Jeff Wilson Jr. fetching anything. Greenlaw and who's the other name you mentioned?
Greenlaw and Ebicom.
Ebukam and Greenlaw could fetch value. I just don't think the 49ers move them. Greenlaw obviously would be the more likely, or honestly, I don't know which one would be the more likelier. I'd say Greenlaw because of the cap price. Greenlaw obviously is only, I think his cap hit is 2.54 million for 2022, and he also doesn't cost the 49ers anything. The 49ers could save 6.25 million by moving Ebukam, but at that price, given his value, I don't think that the 49ers would fetch anything significant in return to justify trading Ebukam. I think so. That's the reason why I don't think they might move Ebukam. I'll give you an interesting name, and it's really based on what the 49ers did last year and who they moved. They moved Jonas Griffith for a 6th and 7th round pick and then traded a 7th in return. So it was essentially a 6th round pick, and he was a backup linebacker, right? Not anybody too special. Demetrius Flannigan-Fowles, do you think that he could potentially get moved this year? He's a special team stalwart, right? Hasn't necessarily played defensively that much. Over the last 2 years, he's played 9% of the defensive snaps back in 2020, 15% in 2021. But he's been on special teams and he's been one of the better tacklers for the 49ers altogether over the past 2 years. The 49ers got in Oren Burks this year, who essentially plays that Demetrius Flannigan-Fowles role. Now, I'd love to see the duo play together on special teams, but then again, the 49ers have guys like Segun Olabi and Jeremiah Gemmel, both who I'm high on, or I think it's Gemmel, but both who I'm high on as undrafted rookies, who I think they'll lose. Just like they lost Justin Hilliard last year, I think they'll lose if they try and place them on waivers to try and stash them on the practice squad. So to me, Flannigan-Fowles, if you can fetch a 6th round pick, maybe, or something like that for him, would you entertain that?
Yeah, and I think that makes perfect sense, right? Because the 49ers are just so great at developing players, and I think they're always looking for an opportunity to gain some return on their investment. And Flanagan Fowles, I believe, was a late round draft pick, if not undrafted.
Yeah, he went undrafted. Yeah,
undrafted, right? So you developed him into a player, and if you could get a draft pick out of him, obviously that's a great return on your investment. I do think that they have a lot of confidence in their ability to develop the linebacking position. Corin Burks, I think, is there to be a special teams ace. So I think that's a great name as far as where a trade could be made. And I do think that's something that the 49ers are always looking for, a way to, stack up some more draft picks to give them some more freedom in the draft. So I think that's a great name, man. That's exactly what I was looking for out of you, Rohan.
Yeah, I mean, the reason also is because Flanagan Fowles is a restricted free agent in 2023, right? When you look at it, Flanagan Fowles, this is his third year of accrued service. This third year, it was I think they call it exclusive rights free agent, which was what Flanagan Fowles was this year. Signed the 1 year, $895,000 deal. But next year, I think the 49ers will be forced to place a tender on him like they did with Greenlaw entering his fourth year of accrued service. So that's why I think Flanagan felt like it'll essentially cost him $2.54 million next year. And I don't think the 49ers, or I don't know what the exact cost will be, but it'll be somewhat in that range. And I don't think the 49ers are going to be looking to pony that money up for a backup level linebacker, especially one who they haven't necessarily entrusted in playing a linebacker role in the last couple of years, right? Like last year, Greenlaw was injured for almost the entirety of the year, only played 3 games, and yet Flanagan Fowles only saw 15% of the defensive snaps. Meanwhile, at State of the Franchise this past week, Kyle Shanahan said they signed Oren Burks not only because of his special teams ability, but because they can trust him to play linebacker when one of those top 3 guys gets injured. That indicates to me that Oren Burks is linebacker number 4 on the roster. And so that's why I don't think they'll tie a financial investment to Flanagan Fowles in the future. And so I think that he could be a potential trade candidate this year.
I completely agree with you, man. I love it. Our man Fernando, one of the dopest supporters of the channel and just 49ers content creators overall. So I always love giving him praise when he jumps into the show. He has a question specifically for you. He's already heard my list. I think he's going to be surprised, or maybe pleasantly surprised, that I think your list and my list are the same. But without further ado, Rohan, who is your running back room?
Are you saying starters, or are you saying the entire room? I assume
I think he assumes the entire room. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, my preference, if we're talking my preference as to what I believe would happen, my preference would be Mitchell, Sermon, TDP, and Jordan Mason alongside Juice as the 5 running backs heading into 2022. Now, do I know if that's going to happen or not? I don't necessarily think so. I think there is an ultimate battle between Wilson Jr. and Wilson Jr. and Mason. But I think, or at least my preference is that Mason is that 4th or 5th running back, however you want to call it.
Right. And make sure you guys go and follow 49ers _throwback, our guy Fernando. He's always doing a really great job clipping up videos from all the different content creators, putting them up. He makes me feel like a superstar whenever he does it for me. Yeah. I'm sure it makes other people feel the same way.
Thank you. Really appreciate 49ers throwback, man. Fernando there doing great work.
All right. Well, Rohan, I haven't had a chance to talk to you too much about Trey Lance in our previous shows. And I just kind of wanted to, now that it's kind of all indications are pointing now, I think it's just everybody knows Trey Lance is going to be the starter. Let's talk specifically about how he changes the offense. And we can go, I'm going to give you the leeway of doing whatever you want to do with this, whether it's scheme or just what challenges he now presents to defenses that weren't there with Jimmy, and talk about maybe some of the flexibility now that Kyle Shanahan has with Trey Lance there as a starter.
Right. And I mean, like the difference, I think there are 2 things that I want to kind of make clear. Do I think the directive and the approach to the offense changes much? Not necessarily. I think the playbook will be similar. It's just different reads in the playbook will be hit. And that's where Trey Lance comes in and his changing the offense kind of mechanism, right? To me, we saw it in the Houston game. look at the throwing chart. Trey Lance threw to almost every part of the field, short, intermediate, deep, but also left to right. That's something that we didn't necessarily see every week consistently from Jimmy Garoppolo, whose throwing charts normally fixated on either the short, behind the line of scrimmage places or within 5 yards, or in the intermediate part of the field and right down the middle, right? So to me, it's you're expanding your offense because you're now opening up every single route. It's not necessarily a predisposed route that the quarterback is throwing to, which gives you more creativity because now the cornerbacks don't necessarily have to focus on one area, but have to focus on every single player on the field. Additionally, I mean, the most obvious part is Trey Lance provides you something with his legs. In the early stage of the Garoppolo 49er kind of relationship, you thought that there was some promise with Garoppolo and his legs, but then he tore his ACL, and from then Garoppolo doesn't necessarily have that the what you want with the quarterback from his legs. And now Trey Lance provides that, right? We saw that in his first start against Arizona when everybody knew what he was going to do. It seemed like everybody knew he was going to run the football, and yet he still was very efficient. 16 carries, 89 yards, over 5 yards a carry, and Trey Lance, I think he had a touchdown in that game, right? As well, running.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong, but I think he had a touchdown as well running. And so to me, that just shows the two, like literally just take the 2 games. 89 yards rushing in one game on 5.5 yards per carry, and then 248 yards on 10.8 yards per attempt. That tells you the two different, like the disparities that Trey Lance provides, and it just shows a level of unpredictability. Another part, how Trey Lance will change the offense. Defenses can't necessarily prepare for him the way that they prepared for Garoppolo because there's not enough film on him to truly discuss Lance's tendencies, to truly discuss how does Lance operate, what are his preferred reads, and all of that, right? There's only noise behind that. And even if you look at college, there isn't enough game film really there either to recognize. And obviously a ton changes from college to the NFL. So that's really to me and to me what I'm one other thing I want to point out. I'm not saying that Trey Lance is going to do everything I just said immediately, but I think that he's shown capability of doing so, whereas we haven't necessarily seen that at times from the quarterback position. The one last thing I'll say how Trey Lance will change the offense. He provides you some I don't know what the word is, but he gives you some like he relieves you a bit from your offensive line because of his ability to get out of the pocket, because of his ability to make plays with his legs, which not only eases the burden on the offensive line, it also allows them to operate in a different manner. And once they've adapted to Trey Lance, which they have this entire offseason, I think that that'll come and be showcased. And so he has the way to change the offense in so many ways while making it all look exactly how it looked under Garoppolo in terms of fluidity. So really detailed answer, but I think that while the offense is like the playbook might remain the same, there are a ton of ways that he can change the offense.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and that detailed answer is why we bring you on every Wednesday, Rohan. That's what we're looking for out of the GOAT like you. So I agree with you. I think that I think your over prevailing theme of saying I don't think the X's and O's necessarily change, but the decision making of the quarterback changes is right on cue. I think a lot of people just expect this Kyle Shanahan to all of a sudden just be calling these different plays. When you actually watch the all 22, there was always a deep route, that option there. And a lot of times that was Brandon Ayuk. A lot of times he was made some separation and could be given the ball. It's just Jimmy didn't feel confident enough to throw it to him. So now with Trey, we've seen that he's willing to make those type of throws, which is why maybe the offense looks different to the casual that's not necessarily paying attention to all of the intricacies or watching, all of the content creators we watch as far as breaking down film. But the truth is that there is a deep option always in Kyle Shanahan's schemes. They just weren't necessarily taken because Jimmy had his comfort zone that he kind of stuck with, which was between the hashes, 10 to 15 yards out. So Trey, I don't think will change the X's and O's. And I do think he's going to benefit the passing game clearly because he's throwing the ball down the field more. But one thing that I think I neglected was how much he's going to affect the running game. And we always talk about his legs as far as scrambling, but I think he's going to help the running backs out quite a bit, Rohan. And what I mean by that is now the the read option is going to be there a lot more. And what I mean by that is now they're playing 11 on 11 because Lance can be part of the play during the rushing attack. So what that means is the linebacker or whatever the defender is that's in position to make the play has to make a decision. Do I go for Lance or do I go for the running back? Where they didn't have to make that decision with Jimmy because they always knew I'm just going to go with the running back, right? But in this case, as the game continues to play and they see, okay, they go for the running back, Lance keeps it, and then, rushes up for like 4, 5, 6 yards, right? Eventually, they're going to have to start making the choice to go after Lance, and that gives the running back a little extra, Jack called it, an extra hitch. And that extra hitch actually can break a run wide open for a receiver because it gives them that extra second to separate from the defender, right? And I think that that's something that I underestimated. And I watched this really good breakdown on YouTube, and I feel so bad that I wasn't able to give credit to the person that put it together. But there's about 50-minute breakdown of how Trey Lance is going to affect this offense. And I can't think of the content creator, but he does an amazing job as far as how Trey Lance and the rookies that they brought in on the offensive side are going to help out the 49ers. And hopefully, I could tweet it out if I get the name. But I just think that that's going to be a big thing because one of the limitations that we thought, Rohan, is, the outside rushing attack is going to be limited because there's not this track speed. But where it can still be there is because Trey Lance is the decoy. Because if they bite inside where Trey Lance is, now that gives, even if you don't have Mostert speed, even a guy like like Trey Sermon with an extra second is going to be able to separate and go wide versus having to go down the tackle. So that is something that I'm really looking forward to as far as the rushing attack. Fernando says it's John Chapman. I don't know if it was John Chapman. I'm sure he's put out a great video. This is somebody that does it not only for the 49ers, he does it for all different NFL teams.
Is it JT O'Sullivan?
I think it might be Steve O'Supremo put Sullivan. It might be him. Yeah, he does a great breakdown. He did an amazing job, and that's something that I took away from that video that I hadn't been thinking about previous to that.
Yeah. And I mean, you make good points, right? Like Lance, I think Lance obviously is the reason why so many fans are excited because there's going to be some change. And because the 49ers have made the Super Bowl and NFC Championship in 2 of the last 3 years, it's not like you need an excessive amount of change, especially because the roster has improved since last year. You don't need an excessive amount of change from the quarterback position in terms of improvement for you to face or for you to see any serious I don't even know what the word is, but for you to go to the next level, you don't need an excessive amount of change. And that's where the excitement from Lance comes with. So I do agree. And Lance, like we said, right, he's going to change the offense in ways. And maybe this even unlocks another element of Kyle Shanahan's play calling. So he finally gets his respect and gets placed above Kellen Moore in a ranking list.
Right.
Well, I mean, who knows? We shouldn't raise the bar too high. Kellen Moore is Kellen Moore.
Kellen Moore is one of the elites, right?
The funny thing is, I actually have respect for Kellen Moore. I do think he's a good play caller. I actually thought, I remember when I was writing the McDaniel articles with Miami when that link was there, I was praising Kellen Moore because I think he's a good play caller. But all right, next topic.
But top 5? I don't know. But yeah, man. I mean, look, I think that this is going to be something that Kyle Shanahan finally chose a quarterback, and now we get to see what he does with it, right? He can flourish, or, it could really hurt him as much as it could really benefit him. So I think it's all going to work out very well. I see Trey Lance being here for a very long time, being the quarterback for this franchise, for the next decade, maybe even 2 decades. And I think it's all going to be smiles and Hallmark cards for the faithful. So I love it, Rohan. We're right at an hour right now. I love giving you the opportunity to go ahead and plug what you got going on for the rest of the week. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, of course. Tomorrow is actually something I'm really looking forward to. I'm doing my getting back the annual, or not annual, I guess the weekly 49ers roundtable episodes. So I'm getting a couple of 49er fans on for tomorrow that reached out, and we're going to have a blast with that, talking state of the franchise and all the fun 49er topics that we can think of tomorrow. That's kind of like my main show for the week. On Friday, I might be going live with Marco again. We went live today. Be sure to check my channel out and check out today's episode. But we might be going live again Friday and talking some 49ers as well. And then over the weekend, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe we do another weekend link. We'll see what we do. But
For sure.
regardless,
Pay attention to Rohan's show, because whenever we're together on the weekend, it's usually on his channel, and
yeah.
it's fire over there.
Oh, yeah. But chat, as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Sunil, of course, great show. Always glad to be on. And I want to do the outro.
It's all you, bro. It's on you, bro. Let's do it.
I don't know the first word, though. Stay something.
Stay safe.
Stay safe. Stay hydrated. And we'll see you guys soon. Peace.
Couldn't have said it better. You guys have a great night.